Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the 46th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of Von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege, its title being Science Must Become Art. The text follows. Now we have yet to consider one condition, which is more necessary for the knowledge of the conduct of war than for any other, which is that it must pass completely into the mind and almost completely cease to be something objective. In almost all other arts and occupations of life, the active agent can make use of truths which he has only learned once, and in the spirit and sense of which he no longer lives, and which he extracts from dusty books. Even truths which he has in hand and uses daily may continue something external to himself. If the architect takes up a pen to settle the strength of a pier by a complicated calculation, the truth found as a result is no emanation from his own mind. He had first to find the data with labor, and then to submit these to an operation of the mind, the rule for which he did not discover, the necessity of which he is perhaps at the moment only partly conscious of, but which he applies, for the most part, as if by mechanical dexterity. But it is never so in war. The moral reaction, the ever-changeful form of things, makes it necessary for the chief actor to carry in himself the whole mental apparatus of his knowledge, that anywhere and at every pulse beat he may be capable of giving the requisite decision from himself. Knowledge must, by this complete assimilation with his own mind and life, be converted into real power. This is the reason why everything seems so easy with men distinguished in war, and why everything is ascribed to natural talent. We say natural talent in order thereby to distinguish it from that which is formed and matured by observation and study. We think that by these reflections we have explained the problem of a theory of the conduct of war, and pointed out the way to its solution. Of the two fields into which we have divided the conduct of war, tactics and strategy, the theory of the latter contains unquestionably, as before observed, the greatest difficulties, because the first is almost limited to a circumscribed field of objects, but the latter, in the direction of objects leading directly to peace, opens to himself an unlimited field of possibilities. Since for the most part the commander-in-chief has only to keep these objects steadily in view, therefore the part of strategy in which he moves is also that which is particularly subject to this difficulty. Theory, therefore, especially where it comprehends the highest services, will stop much sooner in strategy than in tactics, at the simple consideration of things, and content itself, to assist the commander to that insight into things which, blended with his well thought, makes his course easier and surer, never forces him into opposition with himself in order to obey an objective truth. Now, this is a very important paragraph in here, as you have heard. Basically, von Clausewitz sums up what's the juice of this whole deal of how we should consider a theory of the art of war proper, right? He basically acknowledges this subjectivity, as a matter of fact, of the base over which this should be built. And this paragraph is, in fact, put at the conclusion of the chapter on the theory of the art of war, and it opens to the third, about the art of science of war, which addresses new problems. But this is very important because it also shows you fundamentally a lot of things. I want to make a video soon telling the truth about this problem of understanding, but also of really needing a practicality of the understanding, which is valid for science in general, right? And to in certain disciplines, just like our military history, which is a social, let's say, science, but it's actually very closer to other things, ideologically speaking, in the good sense of the word, right? So this realization that everything passes chiefly through this talent, that cannot be framed into a fixed guideline, right? And that can adapt to every situation is really crucial. It also makes you understand the scale of this problem when von Clausewitz here talks about the difference between tactics and strategy, which is kind of evident that tactics is very easier to understand the strategy, why strategy comes closer to this broader ponderation fundamentally that must really leave the mind free of, at many levels to find the best solution, obviously given that certain preconditions, certain capacities, right? But let's simply read this, and the title is very meaningful. Science must become art, right? So we have drawn this difference between what can be objectively, and this is a deep distinction, right? Between science as knowledge, as art as action. This is very important. They're not. They're all mutually supportive, right? Knowledge must at all times operate in the military action, and it couldn't be otherwise. But at the same time, there is a sharp difference between the two things, because essentially one without the other are useless. So the most common mistake that also von Clausewitz critics basically make is considering that science can solve the problem by itself, right? So it's a bit, those people believe in technology can solve all the problems, and then they don't see that technology is useful only when it's applied to a situation that you need it for, and that you have actually created it for, and with means that are not strictly technological, at least that do not pertain essentially to that technology, and also knowing how to apply that, which really makes the entire difference in here. So there is really a deep and instrumental relation between these two, between science and art, that can't be erased. There is a great difference between what can happen abstractly and what happens in reality, and how you deal with that. So, as always, you can rely on a past knowledge of things that have happened. You can't even expect what is going to happen. You can't even predict it by a margin, right, and be correct. The point, though, is that this is never sufficient on most occasions, especially at the higher levels, right, and therefore at the levels where the most important decisions have to be taken. And it requires a very complicated, let's say, it requires the ability to read, but also to feel in this regard, to have acquired true knowledge, right? So true actual experience that can be positively tracked in this sense, but just a base upon which you can build the answer that you need to cope with, can make you cope with the problem at the current moment, right? So it's fairly, as always, it's a very subtle difference. Really, it's normal. I think many people do not see this. This is not something you can immediately get if you never get acquainted before to this theory in the Vom Kriege. You instinctively feel a distrust towards it. It's normal, right? And you generally don't have the sensitivity to understand what he really means. Maybe you do. Maybe you experience what he's saying in a particular field, but still that knowledge is limited at one point. That doesn't make you see that this is actually applicable in greater picture, and especially on systems that are particularly vast and complicated. Going on with the text, von Clausewitz writes, now we have yet to consider one condition which is more necessary for the knowledge of the conduct of war than for any other, right, which is that it must pass completely into the mind and almost completely cease to be something objective. Now, this is crucial, and this is a very heavy statement if you really take it as it is, because basically here, von Clausewitz is denying the objectivity of the knowledge that you require, right? It's stressing the relativity of the situation. That is effectively what happens in reality. So, paradoxically, there is nothing more objective than a subjective understanding, because it's the only possible one that we have. After all, what is having an objective understanding? Like we try often to focus on certain problems to understand them better, but that's exactly the point where the greatest problems actually arise and where the thing gets complicated. And when you realize that the subjectivity in it is, in part, it can be a mistake, it can be a limit. It is a limit, as a matter of fact. But on the other hand, it's the only possible base over which you can actually come closer to objectivity in order to express a judgment. And this is the final realization that von Clausewitz expresses at the end of the chapter of the theory of the art of war. So it's particularly poignant, and then he goes on and writes, in almost all other arts and occupations of life, the active agent can make use of truths which he has only learned once, and in the spirit and sense of which he no longer lives, and which he extracts from dusty books. This is another very important phrase. Now, eventually, as we'll see, that the concept develops, but already in here, there are certain points that are very, very important to me. I can't stress that enough, but this happens, and that's why I think history has this extremely powerful capability of really putting everything in perspective. Like, there is not a limit. There is not a moment in which you say, you can say, okay, I'm done with this, because I've actually formulated this golden section, and I know the proportions, and I can apply them all the time. You basically stand on nothing. And I mean literally on nothing. So, what von Clausewitz is saying here is that there are certain occupations of life. Then he also makes the example of the architect, for example. But this is really valid for everything we do, because we constantly rely on formulas that basically we have learned before. This is particularly risky in many ways, because those formulas, first of all, are, we know they are substantially pre-fabricated, right? And we can't even know where they came from, right? But the point is that it's not fruit of our own intellect. We just learn them often by heart. And it's like, it's cool when you learn mathematical formulas. Most of the times, and normally, especially in the first years, kids do not actually understand what they're learning. They simply know that thing is like a magic formula you can use to solve this or that problem. You start knowing how to do it, but you quite rarely fix first at the beginning of thinking, like, but how did we get there? And then that's normally what happens in the more you go on and you kind of dip in your studies. But at the same time, that doesn't quite happen fully. Like, most of the times we keep just learning how to use these ever more complex systems. Nobody really tells you how they were created. And what we create as a society basically is a form of knowledge that basically we are simply depending on. This is valid for technology as well. Like, and that's why before, and I always make this technological, I always talk about my anti-technologistic prejudices, because that's exactly what we mean. Think about even our knowledge as such. Like, we rely on digital thing. Like, imagine now, I don't know, we live in a pretty troubled time right now, but I can tell you, even worse than many things can happen, really. Just imagine, a meteorite comes to hit the Earth. It already happens. It's plenty there, actually. They don't tell it to you. They're discovering an enormous amount of potentially devastating, lethal meteorites like those all the time since the early 2000s. There's been there are like 150,000 at this point. Well, where does our digital knowledge goes? Like, if the software jams, basically, it's just plastic, and it will die out. Think about megalithic civilizations back there in prehistory. Things they built at the time still stand today. I know, incomparably so, but just to make you understand how there is a philosophy also over which we began to rely. This is the constant race towards the easy, the readily available, the uncomplicated, right? Which is normal, because that's essentially what humans kind of run for, at least seemingly for what we understand. But it this happened largely without looking at the basis of this at the same time, right? Look at coronavirus, even, which is pretty frightening in this regard. We all knew this would happen. Like, it was predicted, not by conspiracy theorists, but by actually some of the most eminent virologists out there, recognized, working with governments, etc. And nobody actually did nothing to prevent adequately what is actually happening right now. As you know, I have a generally positive confidence in, if let's say, yeah, I can say humanity, talking about civilization and such. I mean, I have a generally positive idea of what it means to kind of work together to improve our situation. And generally speaking, humans have proven to do it. There have been many setbacks, there have been many unforeseen catastrophes, there have been a lot of, some of which we also have actually lost memory of. Like, we think that I don't know, civilization only began in 4 millennium Mesopotamia, but if you look at people who lived actually lots of thousands of years before, we have pretty amazing finds. Who knows what happened in the meanwhile? Who knows where there was something already a bit more advanced, was wiped out by natural catastrophes? This is actually pretty likely, considering the amount of unknown that we have and the hints we have. But this is a wholly another topic. And generally speaking, I'm also skepticist towards certain ideas. But there is also, I don't know whether here von Clausewitz was addressing it directly, he's evidently challenging it, is evidently proving it wrong, right? So he's actually concerned that this attitude can be widespread. But it's as if a part of our, let's say, our civilization for the last, especially some 100 years, by this point, has taken the idea that there has to be a constant progress of all kind, that everything is solvable, that everything is easily solvable, especially, and that fundamentally you don't have to rely on your own intelligence, but simply getting things from a source that you can copy and use passively, right? And this is from the kind of where some of the worst mistakes come from. I mean, scientifically speaking, that's still very important, because the achievements we have now are evidently the consequence of a process for which we built upon this knowledge, this understanding. But it's as if we had lost part of our perception and kind of put aside our intellectual potential at a certain level. And that's why I think even von Clausewitz is so equivocated, because we fail to acknowledge that realization. I don't actually know whether von Clausewitz was, I believe he was. I mean, he fully understood this point. He was fully convinced, in my opinion, that there was something that, I mean, he was probably mildly positive about the fact that things could change, that there would be a sort of perfectionment of knowledge in this regard, but evidently on a track that hasn't been followed particularly. Like, his philosophy has been most bent to the idea is, here we found the Holy Grail, and therefore now we just read von Clausewitz just because we have him in our pockets, like we're gonna do good. No. History proved that this didn't happen. The Germans lost 2 world wars by misinterpreting von Clausewitz. And this is a serious problem, because it evidently, there was a lack of intellectual commitment in this regard. There was a lack of flexibility of what even generations that had studied von Clausewitz in part had understood. Like, it had rendered possible an improvement, an achievement. You can't deny that the Clausewitzian theory in itself has actually expanded deeply our understanding of politics, of warfare, of society. But at the same time, it's like evolution, right? The first thing happened with Darwin. He actually got it, he actually remained very open about it. The first thing Spencer does, it transforms it basically into racism, and that's how it's been applied for lots of decades, even for more, right? And it's always the same story, like that there is the actual good source, the intelligent genius that tells you how things are, and there's someone who twists, who bends this, because they think they can't find the absolute formula out of it, and they sclerotize. They're not capable of understanding what that means in the first place. Like, first of all, they have not studied it fully, because they haven't made the effort to attain that same achievement, right? People who attain achievements know how much that costs. People who come after and simply use the outcome of this achievement, they don't realize how costly that is. And this is largely how what we are experiencing in many ways historically, and it's really a problem, because it all starts from the misinterpretation of this data, right? And there are indeed formulas that can solve problems. Our physics is built with formulas, right? But still, the most important thing is knowing how to apply them correctly. Even here, when von Clausewitz makes the example of the architect here, you can be widened like the concept. Like he makes this plan. Well, now we will read it, but you can't evaluate just that. I mean, there is obviously a realization and necessary knowledge that, I don't know, people who deal with engineering in the construction know that are there. So let's say that our hyper specialization as well has brought us to conceive that you can always rely on a number, on a formula, on a concept, on a theory, as if there was always the guy who by repeating it had gotten it right. Many times it happens that people do not get right this knowledge. They don't measure the specific weight of it. They don't see its boundaries, because maybe they're narrower than those ones, right? And while these realizations instead were the fruit usually of a massive understanding, of a massive amount of experience. That's why I stress every time that von Clausewitz had spent his life in war, and that this work comes straight out of it, because otherwise this is incomprehensible. This can be treated just like anybody else who for some reason that we don't fully understand it, because we don't even understand the text, that's the point, wrote it, and then we feel that the problem here is whether we can agree or disagree with it, because we can look more or less intelligent about it from it. It's not quite the point. The point is that there is a struggle for understanding that seemingly less and less people seem, interested in overtaking. And this is a matter of the same von Clausewitz actually realizes that humanity is lazy in this regard. As long as things go well, nobody cares very much. They get careless indeed. Then crises happen, and everybody wakes up, sometimes with a dramatically slow pace, right? There is someone who did knows, but that's not enough, because society is complicated. It has to get fluidified once again. So it's actually a deep struggle, and what we have forgotten about life is that it is a struggle. It's chiefly a struggle. We can't think it as the time in which, okay, we spend a bit of time in here and there, then I want to buy a new car, and then going around, yay, and having fun, and taking pictures, and sitting all the day in front of Facebook, and pretending that that's civilization. That's a form of parasitism in many ways, and yes, it is natural, it's human in part, but still it's like not realizing our potential, and that's a serious moral problem, because the same time and energies you spend were spent for something useful for yourself, would even help lots of other people. It would make you more quicker, let's say, to to react to problems, and instead it doesn't happen. We live constantly with this attrition brought by people who actually spend their lives without learning nothing, even though they think they do, as if, like, yeah, every experience is better than nothing, but let's not exaggerate. I mean, you really should concentrate your efforts in trying to understand. You really should do better, but can really do an amazing lot of difference, because the future is never granted. Nobody grants it to you but yourself. If you're lucky, then you can be unlucky, and then you can even succumb to that, even if you've done your best. So just imagine if you simply don't even do your best, what can happen. Excuse me, I drink a little. Yeah. So after this rant, let's go on with the architect thing, because von Clausewitz writes, even truths which he has in hand and uses daily. I wanted to comment maybe that this is nice. I mean, the fact that von Clausewitz talks about these formulas to be found in, to be extracted from dusty books, right? So this is another important conception that is an anti-intellectualist stand, and is fair, right? Because books at this point have been written by someone, have been alive, have been new, not dusty for some time. And the fact that certain books are simply accessed to get that number, to get that reference, this is very important in history, right? And always think here that von Clausewitz is fixed with the idea that history is the single most important field that can offer support to the theory of the art of war after direct experience, right? So military history specifically. So this is very important because it happens all the time. Look at the average debate on the internet, on groups, and forums, on even in here on YouTube, and see what most people actually discuss. Like it's like a football match, right? It's not about really making a systemic, cogent kind of on spot assessment. Like it's really about scoring a series of kind of a sum of apparent truths that are actually pretty vague, right? And the one who gives up because he's not interested is the one who loses, right? This is the average human attitude to problems. It's not trying to get to the solution for an actually practical use. It's about really emotions. It's really making you feel as if you're accepted, or you're better than others, or you can even hurt others, and things like this. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, okay, I don't care. Like, I will simply keep my time learning more, and I don't care about this all, right? That's also why, for example, first of all, I don't have time, but I'm really tightening the grip on like the guide, let's say, on the comments on Schwerpunkt, because if you want to criticize a content, for example, you should be able to do that, right? Simply feeling troubled, and I don't know, maybe you have a bad mood or whatever, and saying, oh no, I don't like this, or I don't like that, this is not true, and then not even providing any information. I simply block you, because other people who come here do not need to read things you write in this regard if you don't provide an explanation. If you have something to say, source that, show the evidence, and then we can talk about it. Otherwise, you're banned, and it's that simple. And I don't give a damn, because here I manage this channel, so I'm charging here. Point. End of story. So it's a loss of time. You can't lose time to people when you already know by experience, in fact, that 95% of these things are garbage, because they don't even know what they're talking about, and yet people keep babbling about it. That's the real problem, is that as a society we consume an enormous amount of resources for people who can't even stop for a second to reflect about the garbage they're talking about. And that's because they do it. Before saying something, before writing something, think about it. Think before doing something that helps the world, that helps people to live happier and better, and teach it to other people, like make them aware of of the value of this attitude, of the value of this approach, because that's effectively the one from which we can all benefit from. The rest is just really bad, right? I see it, morally speaking, as something bad, and of course you can't divide the two things. There is always the person who in every action you make, there is something you get wrong all the time. In everything you say, in everything you do, doesn't matter how correct you are. In fact, that's the point, that most of the times we measure, for example, the authority on the base of, if there are more stupid people than that person, well, that's kind of fine technically, because in many ways that's how it works, right? It's still better to follow the most intelligent person, even if it's still, a very low standard, but still it's the best available, right? It's better than nothing, literally. But at the same time, do not think that authority is the only one, or that it's the best one. And there is a deep philosophical struggle into this, because there is a part of the population who needs to feel confident and protected. Then there are people who know what the deal is, and these people are constantly challenged from a moral point of view, because they realize actually the full implications of the problems, and they can even maybe lie in certain situations to maybe cause an absolute improvement, let's say in absolute terms, just by maybe putting something simpler. Look at Schwerpunkt. Like sometimes actually most of the times I discuss things that are not, I'm surely not expert on 90% of the times, even more, telling the truth. And but it's still better than nothing compared to the average that you can find. So it at least makes and then I put all my mistakes in that, even if maybe the worst ones are the ones you don't realize, right? That I don't realize in this case, I mean. Then there are the ones that I do realize I make, because I know I could do better, but maybe I don't have time, right, to check at the fullest or getting a better explanation. Also because that would bring me to overly expand the problem, just like I'm doing now. But believe me, it's really about this. When you read a book, books have to be lived. You have really to enter with your spirit within them. You really have to understand the point that writer is making, right? Even if it's wrong, even if you disagree with that. But that's, I think, the fascination that is behind intellectual curiosity, is this idea you can improve your own understanding by fundamentally incorporating other people's ones, and therefore digest that and fundamentally creating an original synthesis. That's the power of knowledge. That's essentially really having an edge in someone else, if you really want to see it in crudely competitive ways also. But that's all where it starts from, and I will make a video about this, because it's very fascinating as a concept. There is not much talk about it, always because we have to fuel, for some reason, this kind of conflictual, polemic, aggressive state, atmosphere, right? Which we need in part, as the good von Clausewitz reminds us, because we are violent beings, and there is nothing to do about that, right, in the first place. But at the same time, we can channel our violence, our emotions, strong into something more positive, right, for everyone. And that's why we need violence as well, because its exercise actually reveals a lot of aspects that are sometimes some of the most important out there. But once again, we have to talk about it on another occasion. So, as we were commenting before, von Clausewitz writes, even truths which he has in hand and uses daily may continue something external to himself if the architect takes up a pen to settle the strength of a pier by a complicated calculation. The truth found as a result is no emanation from his own mind, right? So it's really, simply copying a formula, and okay, that will do, right? This is not a criticism towards architects. Von Clausewitz makes it's important to tell about. I have relatives who are architects, so and I like them, so I don't have no problem to saying this. But the point of making the architect, taking the architect as an example, is really observing this kind of linear, squared, kind of almost, in fact, geometrical view of a reality that naturally is much more shaded, faceted, etc. So that's why the most important concept here is that that formula doesn't come from the emanation, it doesn't emanate, let's say, from the person who is simply applying that, right? And this happens quite often, right? We do many mechanical things every day that we simply assume that they can work, but that after all we test and realize that maybe they're not 100% right. Maybe reality is really shaded, is really something more complicated that we can definitely apply certain rules to, but that can change all the time, right? And that we have at least to do something more about. And von Clausewitz goes on and says he had first to find the data with labor and then to submit these to an operation of the mind, the rule for which he did not discover, right? The necessity of which he is perhaps at the moment only part conscious of, this is also important, but which he applies for the most part as if by mechanical dexterity. Now what he says after, that's very punching, says, but it is never so in war. So you understand from here why he makes the example of the of this kind of mechanical dexterity that crashes unavoidably with such an overly complicated system like war can be, but as many others can. You can't solve the world simply through mechanisms. Otherwise we could entrust the world to machines, and we can't do that. Quite simply. Yeah, I know there are those people who say, oh no, because artificial intelligence one day will take over. Yeah, we'll just... Okay, let's not digress on fantasy stories, because perfectly plausible artificial intelligence will grow to become extremely important, whatever, but also in there are very important premises that sometimes we give for granted, as if you can accept really everything because it kind of sounds plausible, right? This is also another attitude to, even for example, a story. How easy it is to tell a story that you know fairly well in its limits, in its boundaries, and it's convincing to a person who maybe knows nothing about it, and you simply make that person believe whatever you made him want to believe because they have no instruments to actually accept it. But this is what largely happens even with artificial intelligence. Why we lack realization of much more evident and undeniable things, like just the complexity of reality. Once again, it's the illusion of technology, the illusion that technology equates to progress. It's never been like this. Never. Technology is invented on purpose when there is a massive problem that you need to solve at the moment, and that you need resources to create that technology with. Like, you can't think that the world progressed because of technology. It's the world progressed thanks to the fact that it kept producing in ways that at the beginning had nothing to do with technology, but that allowed eventually the resources for technology and for using it, which is very different from saying that technology made the speed that, like, we know that. You can't think at the Industrial Revolution if you don't look at 18th century England and what the hell they were doing there. What was the situation in terms of capital accumulated, of the colonialism, etc. It doesn't make sense, right? that wouldn't be history. It would be as if someone woke up in a day, invented steam engine that, by the way, was already widely known throughout all the early modern, the medieval, and the ancient world. So it's not a big deal. And even in their invention and innovation are two different things. But once again, we're digressing. But the point von Clausewitz is making here is that this mechanism to which we entrust, in fact, so why it's so difficult to erase modernistic, progressist, positivistic, and technologistic prejudices, because we rely every day on these simple mechanisms that we think are what eventually solves the problem. That only tells us how much we depend on them, not how much we understand what they actually are. And that's why it's so dangerous to live in a world like this, because in case that technology cannot be used anymore, nobody knows, for example, how to hunt or how to cultivate, to live out there in the wild. And that it's not that that's a better way of living, because thankfully we escaped from that, but at the same time it's an eventuality, right? And war is evidently one of those situations in which all this over-reliance on the mechanical side of the story is the one it gets mostly destroyed in. Von Clausewitz is very categorical here. He says, but it is never, never so in war. In war you can't reason like that. In war you can't have a machine who solves the problem for you. You're dead by that point, if you wait for it. And he writes then, the moral reaction, the ever-changeful form of things, makes it necessary for the chief actor to carry in himself the whole mental apparatus of his knowledge, that anywhere and at every pulse beat he may be capable of giving the requisite decision from himself. Now, this is a hell of a phrase, right? So, this, the moral reaction is the ever-changeful form of things. We have measure of reality only through our moral reaction. The best thing we can rely is our mental apparatus as a whole, right? And of his knowledge, of course, that, of course, can use mechanisms, should be able to use instruments and to become ingenious, right? And finding out so much, right? How much has been war important for medicine, for communications, for technology. From war, we have created some of the greatest marvels of our human civilization, thanks to war, right? We could have done it in other ways, but that speeded it up in a dramatic way. Why? Exactly because it confronted us with problems were so terrible that we would have probably not gotten to with the same speed and with the same efficiency in certain cases, if not on the long run, right? I like here that to stress probably that that until a person is not put under a certain amount of pressure, sometimes it's not even said that in the absence, let's say in theory, in absence of further changes in that society, that person will get to that solution. Like it's like studying certain things. Until you haven't gotten to a certain level of complexity in your thinking, you objectively don't even know that it's there. So actually war is this moment in which everything is brought so brutally and violently in front of you, and which cancels basically the every doubt in some ways. Okay, let's not say better every doubt, but this kind of lazy character that we have, simply waiting, of procrastinating, and say, well, okay, maybe we'll find some other way in another time. No, you have to solve the problem now. And you tend to do it, otherwise you die. This is the one of the most interesting realizations about war, and because it shows you powerfully that the best power you have, the best technology you can possibly have, even though it's not technology, but I use this term for technologistic people that are fixated with that, is your mind, is exclusively your mind, because without your mind, nothing works, ever. Always remember this, that instruments alone are nothing. Nothing. Technology by itself is completely worthless. It has no intrinsic value in itself. The only thing that gives value to things is our mind, exclusively our mind. Objects do not work by themselves. That's not real. Hence, you cannot entrust the way you deal with things to something that cannot predict all the unpredictable that happens all the time, and that we do know that happens all the time. It should be one of the first realizations. Instead, it is not, because we often think that, we will approximate by this degree because more or less we think things will go in this way. And then things do not go in that way, right? Or at least they go slightly differently from what you had planned, and that causes problems, and you have to fix it. And where were you at the beginning? Thinking that things would go the way you thought. And there is this sense of, let's say, of, I don't know, fatalism as such, but we could say of simply acknowledging the fact that there will be a failure, potentially, but you say, well, anyway, we will deal with it when the problem will present itself. And most of the times, this is not a very good approach to the story. Now, and the interesting thing, though, is that by certain degrees, the only possible, meaning that humans cannot objectively predict everything. They never can, they never will, right? But this doesn't mean that they shouldn't try. They shouldn't try to fill that gap to actually make things happen kind of better because they're better planned. But there is also a limit to this that is not just apparently like a limit of, I don't know, it's just about time. It's objectively even a cognitive problem. Like we cannot know most of what is happening. And we have to refute this obsession that we have learned, I think, from the last 150, maybe, I don't know, 200 years, that there is always be an eternal progress. This is a this is probably the greatest delusion of our civilization. This is such a selfish and egoistic and arrogant and idiotic conception. Progress, in order to have progress, you have to spit blood. You don't have to live your life sitting on a couch playing with apps on your phone. That's not progress. That's you consuming your life, your resources, other people's resources, and nothing else. Right? And fortunately enough, reality reminds this to us. But at the same time, we seem to be hopeless because all the time we rely on things constantly, even me, even myself. Like, in every second, you can find every circumstance you are in. You're essentially overlooking something. You're giving for granted something. You're pretending that things will go. You're hoping, saying, okay, well, I know that I'm risking to do this, but I will do it anyway because, when nothing will happen. Then things happen. It's that simple, and they happen for real. They don't happen in your mind, wishing they will not. And now they happen, and I don't give a damn about you. You will get a baseball bat straight in your face, breaking all your teeth. That's exactly what will happen, and you will suffer. And that's what will bring you to eventually make a sensible change. And that's also why violence is so important, and we should respect it so much. Because violence helps people. You can't have, for example, discipline without violence, right? Violence can be inflicted in many ways. For example, take discipline in schools, children. You have essentially to force children to be there, even physically, for example. If you want to educate them, you have to imposed to pay attention. You have to require something from them, and you need to impose that, and that's a violent mean, and it's good, because otherwise those people would not learn by themselves, or at least they would. But let's say we tend to replicate things that work, so that we manage to impose those things, and even most libertarian people probably see in certain circumstances how important this is. You can't be free to do everything you want, because you are not physically free to do whatever you want. You're always limited. You're always terribly dependent on so many things that if they simply ran out at this moment, you would get hysterical about, because you actually don't know what it even means, where they come from, why they're there, what's all this system about. So I do really think this has always been a great problem for mankind, but let's say the more quality of life improves, and it seems that this becomes more a problem, right? Obviously it depends on how that improves, by the way, but there is I think even physical knowledge is important. Like, if you don't understand physics, if you don't understand thermodynamics, for example, I don't think you can understand things like economy. Many people are convinced that there is, for example, a real life and economy as two separate things, right? That there is a sort of humanity that is suspensed out there, things like human rights, right? As if rights existed for themselves. Rights are something that we invented conventionally to live a better life, organized, discipline-oriented. There are people who genuinely believe that outside our mind there is something that makes us stay alive because we're somehow important. That a person, just because he breathes, should have automatically someone or something that to give stuff to him or her because they're human beings. It doesn't work like that. Our civilization has been built over the deaths of billions of people. And where's this realization in this world? There is not anymore. I think, especially, well, I don't want to sound like a grumpy, let's say, but in the idea that you don't even realize, for example, how much you're lucky to live in a world where you can have knowledge so easily accessible in front of you. This is the paradox. For millennia, we have committed some of the greatest sacrifices, for example, for getting educated, for getting literate. And now, we have literally the world knowledge, in fact, a click away from us, or almost, but still enough to learn a considerable amount of things. Nobody cares. Like, I do think, like, if you were, I remember, like, let's say in the 90s, the idea that the internet was spreading, and people could use it, it was, I mean, some people were thrilled about it. But what do we do now? Looking at videos of parrots shouting on the internet, right? Where is that intelligence? Where is that curiosity, that responsibility, that those dreams ended? Like, it's a serious problem. And it starts from here, because you don't realize how powerful your mind is, right? There are many philosophies regarding... I stand from the violent side of the sword, in the sense that I believe that civilization is fundamentally a violent process. Like, I think that it's not really a matter of mind. I don't think that... I may be wrong, that there is another possible path for... at least with at our level of physical knowledge and technological level, to make civilization grow in the non-mechanical and non-violent way. I don't think that by expanding the powers of our mind, which indeed we have, and we overlook and we waste in many ways, we can realistically achieve so much anyway. There is a big debate about this, because especially in those people who study prehistory, anthropology, the birth of civilization, how this began. I'm actually convinced that we are really coming out of the Clausewitz and Trinity. We're really pretty weird, and and essentially violent and hostile and emotional and instinctive beings. I don't think we have this spark of rationality, but that's essentially our background. I don't think we can be oriented. I think it's a culturalist solution to think that we can be reoriented as a civilization worldwide towards something different from this approach. So that's why I also kind of stay away from things like prehistorical warfare, because if you look at the academic debate, it's actually very, very violent in that regard. It's very, very animated and very ideologized, and I don't like it very much because I think it's very abstract, as a matter of fact. Von Clausewitz doesn't show this. He is pretty sure that those are the basis, that this primordial sense of enmity is from the one from which civilization eventually emerges, right? And this is not much von Clausewitz that does. Is not particularly interested in, in expanding further, in a historicistic way. But he gives it this is it. Take it or leave it. It all starts from there. Well. But we will deepen these concepts eventually. We've already talked about them especially in the first book, but let's go on and let's see about why it's never so in war. Why you can't rely just on mechanicism in war? Because the moral reaction. Okay, we have read it. Excuse me, and. Knowledge must, this is the point, by this complete assimilation with his own mind and life, be converted in real power. Now this is the solution. When you, okay, we hadn't even finished to read to comment the phrase, right? But yeah, here is this independent mindset, right? That anywhere in every pulse beat, he may be capable of giving the requisite decision from himself. This is of dramatic importance. Von Clausewitz is really telling you straight away, you have to be capable of finding solutions by yourself, right? Which doesn't mean you will ever be able to. This has literally nothing to do with that. The point is that you're at least oriented towards that direction, because another direction is wrong. So if you take it, you simply die more quickly. Here instead you have the hope of maybe getting to a point where you will effectively make it. Maybe you don't, but at least you have taken the right, probabilistically speaking, the most important decision. Right, and that's the point. This is a knowledge must, by this complete assimilation with his own mind and life, be converted into real power. So how do you actually get real power? Is by this complete assimilation with your own mind and life. What does this mean exactly? It means that you have to live through an experience to effectively realize with your mind what that reality means for a good margin, for kind of human standards, right? So that it's as if that realization became a part of yourself, because your mind has experienced that and will not forget it in this regard. So it will make you understand automatically the complexity and the reality of things that if you do not experience firsthand, especially in war, you can't properly understand, properly measure, right? You will not have a mathematical formula telling you what it is to be under enemy fire, to risk your life, to be one step from dying. You can't quantify, you can't explain that, but once you get in there, you know what it is, and that will make you see the thing in a whole different way. That incidentally is useful because it's based on a realistic assessment, right? So here you understand what von Clausewitz means where he talks about the subjectivity in the theory of the art of war that effectively takes over objectivity. Because even at that point, what is risking your life? We don't even know what life is, essentially. We just experience it. subjectively, and that's what matters to us. And so, as everything human, so it's war. And that's also another mistake. It is often done. What the hell are we talking about in the first place? We're talking about war. We're talking about a human activity, probably the human activity per excellence, right? And that couldn't exist without humanity in itself. That's also why there is this misunderstanding, slight but radical misunderstanding on the Clausewitzian thought. In the first chapter, when he discusses the realm of war in itself, like what is that pertains to war and what's the tendency of war to do what, and many people interpret that thinking that von Clausewitz is talking about the actual war as something that fundamentally flares on its own, gets undetached from everything else, and they don't even know at that point that von Clausewitz is talking about he's talking ex absurdo, right? Telling you, look, just imagine what war would be if it was let kind of metaphysically free of everything, and then see instead what it is really like when you confrontate with physics, with humanity, with what it is that makes it work in the first place, right? So the more you read here, the more you could point out interesting things, but probably more important than all the others is your subjectivity, your individuality as the human measure of reality. This is Kant speaking. By the way, I always think that von Clausewitz was influenced massively about the current philosophy, and this is a deeply moral thinking. Never think this is just like, let's talk about war, just provoking people, letting them think that war is kind of cool, that here we talk about it because we like it. Everybody who has studied Vom Kriege perfectly knows that this has literally nothing to do with that. On the contrary, von Clausewitz is perfectly aware of war. He knows perfectly well, sadly for him, what that meant. And that's why he wrote all this. So once again, there is this powerful assimilation, mind and life, that must be converted in real power. Right? This doesn't happen just through mind and direct experience, right? Von Clausewitz has explained to us that of course there are other factors like courage, for example, that here is not taken into account because we're talking about theory. So we're still not talking about what you need. Actually, we have already seen it previously. What is that it takes to command, right? It's not just intelligence, because if it was just a matter of intelligence, we would just use intelligent people to lead armies. It's not just like that. They need something else, emotionally at the same time, and without that they can't be good commanders in the first place. But in the theory of the art of war, so in something that in theory we should in fact keep always next to us, like as a book, knowing that we can't check that out in certain situations, but we can consult it, but it's always aside from us, and what really is important is in our mind, right? Everything comes from this kind of detached idea from which it's what mind and life, and here you can read experience and you can read military history, you can get, in fact, a theory of the art of war. And it's wholly subjective at this point, because nobody has concretely told you what it is until you haven't understood it on your own. It's also another very important process, intellectually speaking. You can't pretend to learn straight something from someone by heart and not applying it and simply buying it for what it is. So that's why it's very easy, actually, among people who, this is a problem, I think, people who, for example, just study at university for 3 or 5 years, let's assume. They're young people, they're usually in their early 20s, right? And that's a moment in which you normally get easily infatuated with intelligence and can't say rationality, unfortunately, but just with intelligence, in the sense that you start to appreciate someone who, at that age, you're simply, that is showing you where you start to know the world consistently for real and under your control, how it can be interpreted like. Well, normally if you end your studies at that point, you will remain to that, like, unless you make a profession that is based on continuing perfectionment of what you have learned, right? But it's not surprising that von Clausewitz makes the example of the architect, because the architect can become more skilled in this sense over time, can even expand his knowledge, his understanding, and become a scientist as such. I mean, if he really wants to get engaged, I don't know, in German, in I don't know, in engineering, in lots of very important fields you can expand. But it's essentially, it has probably a few to do as an art itself with the knowledge of the world as a whole, right? And this happened to me a lot of times. You meet people who were dramatically competent in their own fields, but had pretty strange attitudes towards the world that, I think a person who gets interested in history just superficially can debunk pretty easily. But not because in this sense history is just one discipline among the others. It's just because history tries to make a bit of a synthesis out of everything. So, in other words, you can be an excellent whatever professional, but being, including an historian, by the way, as it unfortunately happens, and being totally disgusting human being in many ways. And being disgusting because you probably don't understand what the world is about in that regard, and you continue to make mistakes that have nothing to do. I can't think of a single profession that I can exemplify, because otherwise, if you are from it, you will say, "Oh, what the hell?" You're targeting me. Well, no, it's really like that, and that's why we tend to solve this with hyper specialization, seemingly saying, okay, well, let's speak just a person who is extremely expert in that field, so we know it doesn't make a mistake. But paradoxically, that can be a mistake in the same way, because if these people are not exposed to other interdisciplinary knowledge, these people can sclerotize in a way that it can hardly become successful, right? This is also a problem in politics, for example. Not, I think, competence, like, it's the risk of seeing the world as frameable just through scientific categorizations. This is what we thought, like, during the Enlightenment, or during, in part, during positivism, right? This idea that everything is squared in a certain way, and there is no other way to see that. That is what generated actually some of the greatest disasters in human civilization. I'm telling you because those were seen in the 20th century. This blind faith, obedience, this idea that there is no way to doubt of certain things, this brings to fundamentalism in many ways. So now we're rediscovering that probably the best thing to do is to reconsider a lot of this way. And it's a big challenge to change the mindset, apparently, at least. But here von Clausewitz seems to get it, and it's all the more important because he is, according to me, he's starting from a completely honestly intellectual point of view. He hasn't started this thing talking about, I don't know, I believe in this or that, or I've had, I don't know, even if I've been in war here, I got my opinion because I don't like these people because they kind of mocked my ideas or they discarded it. I'm just telling you why I think this, because on which scientific base you can't say these things exactly. And this scientific basis is the healthiest because it doesn't frame reality into an inflexible structure. It's telling you that it's exactly a scientific thinking that opens you to every possible option, but always realizing that there is only one that is real. And albeit you can't see the truth in it because nobody can, but you know at least it's in it. In a way or another, and that's where you should start revolving your thinking. Incendiaries who prefers the abstraction, two ends that are not even entirely clear in this regard, because I think it's really because of lack of understanding, and that can be caused also by other reasons, of course, but they're simply non-scientific in some way. I think you can't have a solid moral if you are a truly scientific person, which means never to pretend that there is a dogma of any form. And that's the only way of being moral, and that's why also there are being some... So everything is always being interpreted. From science to religions, it's very difficult to detach people from the framework that they have built around them in general. Because that's seemingly kind of an instinctive reaction, but not a rational reaction. But there are lots of here implications I don't want to discuss. It's evident though that everything starts from yourself. Like you are the true measure. You're truly responsible for yourself. You're the only measure through which measure, in fact, excuse me, the word game, but reality as such. You're only meter to which measure reality. There's no other way. You can feel sympathies, emotions, feelings. You can, be empathetic towards people, other people, etc. But you are still the one in charge of yourself. And this is frightening, marvelous, I think. Like, many people saw it as a limit, even as a damnation. Yeah, it partly is. It definitely is. There is no way out of it. But you're still the one in charge here, and that makes the difference. So you truly should be concentrated on that in the first place. This is what is often forgotten. This is what von Clausewitz is telling us. We tend to delegate this capacity of ours to other things that will work for us, will think for us, will essentially do all the unwanted, right? And that's natural in part. We don't want to get tired, but at the same time we can't even simply just not doing anything about whichever it happens, because we won't just want to be left alone. And von Clausewitz says, even if that was true, even if you believed that that's essentially your aim, well, you still end up being challenged. So you see how subtly moral von Clausewitz is. He's not judging you. He's not telling you, like I'm doing now, for example, criticizing general here, society, others. Well, I always put myself within this criticism because, I also have a lot of things that even don't, that I could do way better according to these lines at all levels. But von Clausewitz is simply telling you, look, that, okay, think like that, but just know that even if you don't want that, you will have sometimes to get into this stuff. Even if you're a pacifist, one day you can get into a war, and you will not be the one deciding that. So if you care about getting out of here alive, or at least to accomplish something you deem to be useful, well, you should listen to me, because this will not give you the magic answer, the magic formula at the moment, as you're used to think, by sticking to certain ideologies like simply pacifism. That's why I don't think that's a moral choice in the first place. You should be pacific, it's fine, but to be a pacifist, it's a wholly different thing. It's actually a radically violent ideology. It's probably one of the most violent in absolute terms. But just know that you must know what this will be. Even you have to cope with that point. So if you want to listen to me, fine. Otherwise, don't. And it's your business, right? And this is very subtle and very important at the same time. And we're talking about real power here. Real power. And then here von Clausewitz repeats this other idea that is very important about talent, and this is a quote, "This is the reason why everything seems so easy with men distinguished in war, and why everything is ascribed to natural talent. We say natural talent in order thereby to distinguish it from which is formed and matured by observation and study." This is dramatically important, right? So here he repeats fundamentally the fact that you can even study for a lifetime, just to paraphrase it, but fundamentally it's just in the moment you will have to translate this into action that you will see was good at it, was not, right? That is also very, very meaningful in my opinion. Always reminded when you study military history that I must say, and probably some of you will not agree with this, but I firmly believe it, and I think it's sustained by lots of evidence. And in this historical time, actually, military historians objectively understand more about war than soldiers themselves. And I'm not kidding. The point, though, is that this has nothing to do with whether, by understanding more war, you would be a better soldier there by having studied military history. It's always experience, the first thing for von Clausewitz. Then, in parallel, there is part of this experience is comforted by knowledge of military history, of these past events you've not been into, but that we're dealing about war, right? But still, at the same time, there is the difference in here that we've seen before between knowledge and action. They're two different things. Like, you can be, for example, the smartest person ever, so you have this particular... You may not even have, at that point, have the talent for command. But let's say that rationality is objectively one of the most important things in war for von Clausewitz, probably the single most important one in that regard, in a conscious form and coming straight of your mind. But if you're not courageous, if you're not determined specifically, you're worth nothing. Like, you can maybe be good in certain situations, but not because of intelligence at that point, because in order to take action, you must have guts at the same time. So that's a powerful implication. And that's why here von Clausewitz says basically rare people rise so easily and so unexpectedly in war, just to actually become the most distinguished people out there, apparently just naturally and due to military talent that they own, right? And here von Clausewitz just made the distinction, saying, we call natural talent essentially what comes as an ability aside from what is being matured by observation and study, right? That is to say, I talked to you a lot of time about, feudal warfare, right? I might know a lot of things. I know just a few things. For the ones I wish I knew. But this doesn't mean anything whether I would be a good commander in feudal warfare. It's nothing to do with it. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. More likely I wouldn't, because actually von Clausewitz says that it's rare, so it's not very frequent. But also in here, there's always a space. Like, we all have a location in here, in the hierarchy. We can be good at something. And until we don't prove it through experience, we cannot know. We cannot know. And that's pretty, pretty deep as a concept, right? This doesn't flatter anyone. This is the beauty of this theory. It doesn't delude you. It doesn't make you think you can be special just because you're you. No, you have to earn it. Point. And you're not even be capable of it, even if you're a good person. Which is a pretty realistic assessment, because life is unjust, deeply unjust, and we have to live with that. Unfortunately, live and die with that. And these realizations are not easy. Like, we are not even expected to accept them. The only thing we are expected to do is to react to them, sometimes in the most painful and horrible ways, but still being capable of dealing with that. And war is important because aside from the the unknown and the physical side of the story, at least war is still something you fight against mankind. Like, it's not something you it's terrible as it can be, but there is no certainty that everything can go wrong. It's sometimes difficult to understand this during war, but let's say that war can have dramatically different outcomes from the ones that were foreseen before. And therefore, there is hope to interplay. And it's a part, in my opinion, why wars are fought sometimes. Like, because we think, also sometimes, maybe we have an evident advantage. We say, well, this is gonna be easy. Then maybe it can go even better than your expectations, but usually things at least are much more complicated, and this brings a lot of further the necessity for a lot of further resources you had not taken into account, at least if you go there without in fact this experience, with this optimism, with this positivism about it, that is insane, right? But I wouldn't say it's natural or congenial or instinctive for human mind, but let's say that we do tend to just stick to the simplicity, to what we can understand in this regard, outside of let's say a realistic view of reality. And this is what you see in fact usually in politics. Like, politics works as if you look at debate of I don't know, I don't want to talk about specific countries, but let's say I mean, it seems like the political debate is revolving around an intelligence you could easily have at kind of 12, 13 years old. And why? Because I suspect that many people remain at similar ages, mentally speaking, or at least that maybe socially we I don't know, as groups we are kind of, we bring to narrow down things to digest them better. Like, in front of an audience, we don't want to be unbound. Politics is very complicated, so but sometimes you even wonder, what the hell are we talking about? Like, so most of the statements are just for form, right? The contents are always, there is an hypocrisy in this regarding policy, that in politics, that is perhaps not so like so detrimental. Maybe it's really functional to our societies, because we do need, after all, to narrow down things to simple reality. But sometimes it seems that it happens just to comfort people who want to hear a few things, and just to vent and to get angry just against a specific target, so that you know what's the point of reference. But that simply means that you have a low knowledge of reality, in general, of social reality, of political reality, and this often happens in war. And that's why it's often debated at the limits of ridiculous, and by abstracting by a big deal, because many people don't realize that it's the other way around. It's instinctive to get things simpler, so that you can't have the illusion of dominating them in some way. But it's evident that the more you go ahead with the idea, the more you start thinking about it, the more complicated it is. But it seems, politically speaking, we tend to shut our mindset when we talk about politics. There is like a part of our brain that gets shut when we talk about politics. Even the most reasonable people seem to say pretty stupid things. But I'm not convinced at this point, especially of social development, that is excusable just on a biological base, because there are certain limits that are frankly ridiculous to see, and well, whatever. So Von Clausewitz goes on and says, "We think that by these reflections we have explained the problem of a theory of the conduct of war and pointed out the way to its solution." So bear in mind, as always, that these paragraphs are always part of a series, of a long series here of thoughts. Here in the second chapter, second book, von Clausewitz basically has started from the beginning of the theory of the art of war, historically speaking, and saying, look at how people started, like, and why, and arrived to this point, and realizing that the main problem was to abstract reality, pretending to objectify something you can't objectify simply because you still don't know what it will be like when that is going to be in front of you, and the only way this can be acknowledged is subjectively, though. So this is basically the solution at which we have come to, and these are fairly simple concepts, right? Von Clausewitz it's not difficult. When I started this series, I began to say, like, yeah, okay, you should always study von Clausewitz, you should always understand it. It's kind of difficult, it's a hard text. Yes, because the general approach towards it usually is. There are all these barriers, these preconceptions to break in order to get to the core of it. But the core is always there, right? The fault, generally speaking, is yours, because these things are stated since the beginning. They're explained thoroughly, logically, rationally. There's a chain of logical thinking here that must be followed. But after all, von Clausewitz is simple to study. It's not difficult. It's not an exoteric. It's not a kind of cryptid. You can easily understand him, and therefore that's also why very, very, very easy to spot those who criticize him and they have not read it. Like, you can immediately say whether a person has read or not von Clausewitz. And let's be honest, that is kind of long, because it's a work that is generally long, and it takes time to read it, takes time to understand it, yes, but after all, it's all very simple. Right, so we have to be very careful, and I hope this series works for something. Like, I genuinely think that you can appreciate the consistency of the Vom Kriege, because it's fully coherent with itself. There is not a part of it that you can't say, well, but this part is not. Like, many people even spot contradictions, etc., but that's the particular style. Misunderstanding sometimes of, first of all, an unfinished work, but still of a, if you point out that there are contradictions in here, first of all, they should be spotted practically, and very often they're not. Accomplished to this also poor translations of the text, such as the one actually we're reading here, but I read it before in actually in 3 languages, and I because it's very shaded text, so also in there linguistical competences other than just philosophical, for example, or historical, or even scientific or social, are very, very important. So you can't start reading this text, I don't know, if you are not interested in the thing in general, but you should back it with some form of intellectual consistency on your own. But it's still simple. This work is still aimed at being read by anyone. Literally, when von Clausewitz makes all these examples about, for example, of crafts, of professions we've seen even today, he does it to really make us understand it, like as if we were these people that we are, and that we can understand easily this analogy, but it's simple. It's very simple, so everybody can read it, everybody can learn it, and it's very easy to spot who doesn't get it. Because very often there is nothing I've read up to here which was out of context, was kind of contradicting itself. I mean, this whole thing is pretty damn organic, it's pretty damn coherent. There's nothing gets skipped, or you can equivocate, right? And I know I will expand maybe one day on the criticism of von Clausewitz, because it interests me objectively, but not because I think it can produce much of a counterpart to this theory, but exactly to spot mistakes, right? And spotting mistakes on the base of what is most difficult for us to understand as a preconception to this work. So von Clausewitz goes on and says, of the two fields into which we have divided the conduct of war, tactics and strategy, the theory of the latter contains unquestionably, as before observed, the greatest difficulties, because the first is almost limited to a circumscribed field of objects, but the latter, in the direction of objects leading directly to peace, opens to itself an unlimited field of possibilities. So this is about the difference between tactics and strategy. We have seen in the previous videos how objectively tactics is much easier to understand than strategy. How this should not be confused simply with other things compared to strategies. I mean, in the theory of the art of war, strategy has properly a field on its own. It's not politics, it's not, I don't know, logistics. It's something different. It's the purely military thing. It's really using your military instruments to get to combat, and where and how, right? And to give meaning to these clashes. So do not confuse it, and this gets always confused, because more or less it's easy, in fact, to even understand what tactics is about. Leave aside, there is always the genius that confuses strategy and tactics, but the that's another problem. But the let's say the challenging part of the story is that there is that of course strategy is tied to politics, it's tied to logistics, it's tied to lots of other things. Actually everything, as von Clausewitz says here, but still to do with a military dimension on its own. And it deals with means that are already there, right? So when you have to prepare supply train, well, that's not technically a military problem. That's gonna have consequence in the military sphere, but it's still not what conceptually strategy is about, right? But strategy must draw from everything here the knowledge that it serves to take that military decision. That will be translated, in fact, in a tactical engagement, right? And it's beautiful, this thing he says here, that strategy is leading directly to peace as an idea. This is not an ideological statement. That's literally what strategy has in itself the aim of, right? Then politics intervenes, right? I've been asked this, wait, is it strategy bringing to peace? Well, strategy has the objective of crushing the enemy, of defeating the enemy. So it has necessarily to bring to peace in that regard, right? But whether the strategy is still a part of the military instrument that politics uses. So if a person wants to has a political interest to prolong war, well, strategy in that regard is bent to the political aim, but in itself, in the way it does operate, it is aimed at blocking the enemy, right? That's the point. And to secure the situation, that's the real point. So, but this opens to, strategy itself opens to an unlimited field of possibilities. This is really the idea. Even tactics does, partly, but it's much more limited in this regard, or at least there can be infinite variations all the time, but not necessarily so kind of multi-layered as we can imagine, right? The strategy is really the domain of infinity. In many ways, solving strategical problems is a really tough thing. It has to do with a lot of understanding, a lot of intelligence of the things of the world, right? Then eventually they translate themselves into a military decision. But you have to take into account virtually everything. That's why it's so complicated, and that's also why it never be so like that. There is a lot of determinism usually when, I mean, the larger the system is, and generally speaking, we tend to give deterministic answers to it. This is also a trick that often happens, like saying, I don't know, a campaign here was doomed because of this reason. How many times you said, this war was useless, it should have not been fought in the first place. These are very heavy statements that have come to affect even the way we look at the world, our foreign and domestic politics. They have a great impact. I mean, look at the history of post-war world. Yeah, like we still live in part in this sort of defeatism, the idea that, for example, war is incomplete. Well, this is also another, that it never comes to that there are no victories anymore. This is a really a naive statement, because it doesn't take into consideration that war has always been like this, right? I don't know, I'm promising to make a lot of videos about a lot of things, actually, that they're really very historical at some point, but I talk a bit more about contemporary history and history of military thinking, etc., but it's mostly a political history that shows you how there are people who take advantage today of the naivety, in fact, of those who really believe that war has never been but what we see every day it really is. Right? We need to think that now it's got wars, like the Chinese colonials would think that now war would get to the infinite, to the extreme. Why? Like, if you haven't studied Von Clausewitz, you can't talk. All those people will think that Sun Tzu is an actual thing, right? That is kind of comparable to Von Clausewitz because of this deep Oriental philosophism, wisdom about war, because they knew better. No. What do you think the Japanese defeated the Chinese like in the 19th century? Do you think, what do you take from Sun Tzu? Something tells you, the Japanese military was redesigned on the base of the Prussian model, and who was at the base of the Prussian doctrine, military theory at that point. Like, wake really up. But there are a lot of people who actually waste a lot of paper. Think about those books written today. They're utter garbage, comparing Von Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. Like, if you ever find something like, I give you the authorization of burning that. Like, burning books to me is one of the greatest sacrileges you could ever do. But in that case, that's Allah, or at least leave those books to be covered in dust somewhere else because they're no use. Like, you can learn from the delusions of the people who write them, but you can't, you also have probably something better to do with your life. These are the kind of digressions I care about, because I would like to make you understand that this theory we're discussing now every 3 days is not abstract. Right? It has a real concrete, it's a concrete depiction of reality. But it's so concrete that it poses you in front of the same problems that you have to understand reality. And that's why people don't like it, because they're still kind of deluded themselves. They can't understand reality to the core. They can't get to the truth, right? And we are still sick of positivism. Yes, we are. We are still children of positivism in many ways, and we keep doing that mistake over and over again. Then von Clausewitz writes, since for the most part of the commander-in-chief has only to keep these objects steadily in view, therefore the part of strategy in which he moves is also that which is particularly subject to this difficulty, right? And yeah, so this means that there are essentially certain objects that, as we've seen, have to be essentially simple and few in war. And so that the commander-in-chief, while taking strategical decisions, has to rely, actually in a simplified form, of the realization of what is in front. It has to not to get lost in the detail, but to solve the simplest things as they are the most important, and therefore, but at the same time, yeah, simple because they are kind of big chunks, but they are composed objectively by smaller aspects that have to be potentially calculated in for a certain quota, which is always minority, right? But it's still better than nothing, and that is immensely difficult at the same time. So von Clausewitz concludes finally with this theory, therefore, especially where it comprehends the highest services, will stop much sooner in strategy than in tactics at the simple consideration of things, and content itself to assist the commander to that insight into things which, blended with this world thought, makes his course easier and surer, never forces him into opposition with himself in order to obey an objective truth. This is very important. So here it's two concepts essentially. The first one is that the theory of the art of war gets bogged down more easily, in fact, in the more difficult field that is strategy, right? So strategical problems are much more significant than tactical ones, and therefore theory accordingly serves better tactics than strategy. Tactics is fairly easily explainable, right? There are not massively difficult things you have to learn at that point. So theory has the role of comforting, giving this insight to the commander. That's really what it has to do. This is blending the knowledge of warfare through the past, because really whether you're talking about experience or direct military experience or military history, that's still the past, right? And it kind of gets blended with everything you know at that point, because everything you learn is already past in some way, right? So even the commander, in this sense, is basically looking at theory and not seeing something that is always like that. It's not an objective truth, like he doesn't have to obey to an objective truth. But these knowledge, this awareness, will make his course easier and surer, never forcing him into a position with himself. This is very important, because it makes you realize the subjectivity of realization, that you are not much to be in a position with reality, but with your own understanding of reality. Even when reality arrives like strongly against you, and you can see it with all its might, you still don't know what's the objective truth behind it. You still have to cope with it in a way that isn't expected. Like, just to make a simple example, if we were talking, what is a theoretical notion you could learn? Well, I don't know, that in the ancient world, infantry was generally stronger than cavalry, that in the 12th century, 12th to 13th century Europe, well, it was generally the other way around, especially in the West. In the ancient world, by the way, in certain specific, you hear here now how many distinctions all the time, but we know what we're talking about, because you already know by approximation. I was talking about things like, the Greeks, the Romans, right? And that's something that makes your course easier and surer. That is, if you want to see a shock charge of heavily armored cavalry with stirrup, with couché, Langsgrip, etc. in the 2nd century BC Italy, you will not see that, right? So if you were there, you would be fairly sure about not seeing that. But still, what you need to know would be lots of other things that I can't tell you now, because first of all, we don't even know, because it's like 2,000 years ago. But also because if you were there, you had problems to calculate, and maybe, cavalry charge at that point could have really solved the problem. Even frontally, it did happen at times, we think, in certain situations. So you see here, it's an exception to reality, and theory is not in opposition to it, because it says, in generally speaking, that was so, but not always, right? So you have this kind of sensitivity of wisdom. This is really a wisdom. This is not an intelligence. It's like saying, I don't know, I give you that this is the general thing that happens, but then you will have to see what it will really turn like, right? And this is the correct approach. But then the person who is in charge is you here, not me, who is telling you this thing. And that's the philosophy behind the Vom Kriege in itself. And that's why many people are discontent with that, because it says, but this doesn't teach me how to do war practically. Because this book is not... I mean, it also talks about how doing it, like, because it gives you the dimension of how to do that. It actually teaches you that, but it doesn't tell you what you should do in every single situation, because that is impossible. Nobody can tell it to you, ever. And, alright, so this was the end. And we will go on, fortunately, now with this thing, which is definitely very, very interesting. It gets ever interesting. I think for now we can stop it here. And therefore I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.